Welcome to the GRESB training program. This lesson explains the structure of the infrastructure asset assessment. In this video, we'll introduce the asset assessment structure and describe its components and its relationship with the fund assessment. Next, we'll look at the scope of ESG issues covered by the assessment and the aspects and weightings of the asset assessment components. Following this lesson, we recommend that you review the lesson Asset Assessment, Entity and Reporting Characteristics. We'll start with an overview of the two infrastructure assessments to establish the context for the asset assessment. GRESB provides two complementary infrastructure assessments, a fund assessment and an asset assessment. Both address critical aspects of ESG performance through a globally applicable and standardized reporting and benchmarking framework. The fund assessment is intended for infrastructure funds and portfolios of assets, while the asset assessment is completed by individual assets. In many cases, these assets will be owned by and form part of an infrastructure fund, but in some cases the assets stand alone. For example, when they are owned directly by an investor or when the asset is a listed infrastructure company. Both the fund and asset assessments consists of management and performance components. But it is important to note that a fund does not complete a performance component itself. Instead, the underlying assets of the fund comprise this. If more than 25% of the fund's underlying assets complete the infrastructure asset assessment, the scores of these assets are averaged and the fund will obtain a performance score infrastructure fund. For the asset assessment score to contribute to the performance score of a participating fund, the fund must be linked to the asset. There is a simple process for this that is described in detail in the lesson called Fund Assessment Performance Component. From the asset side, if a fund requests a connection to an asset, an email will be sent to the account managers of the asset and a notification will appear in the assessment portal page on the links icon. Accepting the connection is at the discretion of the account manager or managers of the asset entity and will enable the fund to have access to the score and data for the asset. Now we'll focus on the asset assessment. The GRESB Infrastructure Asset Assessment is the global standard for ESG benchmarking and reporting for listed infrastructure companies, private infrastructure assets, and investors that invest directly in infrastructure. Precisely what constitutes an infrastructure asset is typically defined by investors at the investable entity level. These assets may comprise single or multiple facilities. Either type of asset might participate in the asset assessment. However, reporting as a single facility provides the best basis for benchmark comparisons and is therefore recommended. While we explain some different approaches here, participants with questions about specific circumstances are encouraged to contact the GRESB help desk for guidance. Examples of single facility assets include a provider of water and wastewater services in a single network, an airport, or a telecommunications company with a single telecommunications network, for example, in a single country. In some cases, the asset's activities may be spread across a number of facilities. GRESB considers this to be a multi-facility asset. Examples of multi-facility assets include an entity that operates several toll roads as one asset, an entity that owns a portfolio of small wind farms, or an entity that operates a collection of distributed scale solar projects. If a participant elects to report on multiple facilities in a single asset assessment, then it is strongly recommended that this aggregation be kept at a single sector and country combination. Otherwise, peer group comparisons are likely to be far less specific and useful. For example, a multi-facility asset that consists of onshore wind farms in the UK can be compared to other UK wind farms, whereas an asset with wind and solar farms in various European countries will likely fall into a peer group of renewable energy in Europe, which is far less useful for comparison. Multi-facility assets that participate as one entity should have centralized management and aggregated performance data. As mentioned earlier, the asset assessment has two components: management and performance. Participants are encouraged to complete both components to obtain a GRESB score. However, in certain circumstances, some participants may find it beneficial to complete just one component. The management component measures the entity's strategy and leadership management, policies and processes, risk management, and stakeholder engagement approaches, comprising information collected at the entity level. The performance component measures the entity's performance, comprised of information collected at the asset level. It is suitable for any infrastructure company or fund with operational assets. Looking now in a little more detail, there are actually some other parts to the assessment. The entity and reporting characteristics identify the asset entity and describe its main characteristics and how it will report. These characteristics inform both the management and performance components. Each of these assessment components is shown in the menu at the top left corner in the portal, as shown here. Before looking at the different components further, it is worth understanding the scope of the asset assessment, in essence, the ESG issues covered. The asset assessment addresses a total of 45 ESG issues deemed to be material to investors and fund managers. These issues are reviewed with our stakeholders each year and appear throughout the asset assessment. There are 13 environmental issues, 16 social issues, and 16 governance issues. Let's look now at the aspects and weightings of the components of the asset assessment. The management component contributes 40% to the asset assessment and the performance component 60%. The management component consists of 5 aspects: leadership, policies, reporting, risk management, and stakeholder engagement. It is composed of 28 indicators. The green circles are scored indicators. The scoring weightings of each aspect are shown here. The performance component consists of 12 aspects: implementation, output and impact, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, water, waste, biodiversity and habitat, health and safety, employees, customers, and certifications and awards. It is composed of 20 indicators. The green circles are scored indicators. The performance component accounts for 60% of the asset's GRESB score. The maximum score for certifications and awards is fixed at 2.9%, and the indicators in the aspects implementation and output and impact are unscored. All other aspects and indicators in this component are subject to materiality-based scoring. Materiality-based scoring is further explained in a separate lesson. Thank you for taking the time to complete this lesson. We hope that it helped you understand the structure of the infrastructure asset assessment. For any questions, you can contact us at gresb.com/contact.